What's up, closers? This is Kevin.
This is Ryan.
This is Becca, and you're listening to the Close of Business podcast,
the one and only STEM podcast for young professionals.
When the company laptops close,
the beer's open,
and the conversation flows.
All of this and more happens
at the close of business.
Welcome, closers, to episode 30, right?
Yeah. 30 already? Holy
wow,
crap.
the Dirty 30, which is the new 20, so really episode 20 of the Close of Business podcast. We are here without Ryan, just Becca and I in the studio. We've got a pretty dope episode coming your way. I think the topics cover 5G, moon landing, and Neuralink. First things first.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in really quick. Those of you guys who are tuning in for the first time and you're like, Close of Business, that's a weird name. Does that mean that your business is not operating and out of business? No. The idea is that we're hanging out after business hours are over and we're talking about stuff that we like.
Did somebody ask you what?
Yeah, some people are confused. I know. So,
I thought it was
Close of Business, after 5 o'clock, we're hanging out, we're drinking beers, we're talking about stuff going on in the tech space.
Yeah.
So
it's supposed to be a cool name. Don't question it.
Yeah, just jump on the train. Just accept it.
All right, Becca, moon landing. You want to kick this off? I've got conspiracy theories, but...
So by the time this comes out, it's going to be what? Tuesday? Today's Tuesday, July 23rd. So the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing was on Saturday.
How'd you do that without looking at your calendar?
I memorized dates. I don't know. I'm good with numbers, man. That's why I'm an engineer.
Okay.
Anyway, so 50th anniversary of the moon landing. Huge deal. So we landed on the moon July 20th. 1969, Apollo 11. So it was Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong. Shout out. Anyway, I think the thing that's so nuts about the moon landing is JFK. So he gave a speech in Houston. I think it was September 12th or something like that, 1962. And he said, we're going to start funding the Apollo program and we want to get to the moon. They got to the moon less than 7 years later. That blows my mind. They got to the moon. They're like, well, we're just going to do this. And then less than 7 years later, they did it.
I'll probably bring it up later. But yeah, he promised by the end of the decade that they would be on the moon.
Yeah.
And makes you think the last year before the end of the decade, they get on the moon. Coincidence?
No, that just means they met their goal.
Okay.
Are you trying to push conspiracy theories here?
No.
Oh, come on.
We'll get into it. Go ahead. Keep going.
So after they landed, I just thought this was weird. I was kind of wondering what they were doing the whole time. But they landed on the moon. Mm-hmm. Apollo lands on the moon. It took them 6.5 hours to actually get out of the ship to walk around.
Wait, what? Do you know how long it took to get to the moon?
No.
Hey, Becca, pause. Go ahead. I'm going to Google. Okay, time in. It took Apollo 11, 75 hours and 56 minutes to enter orbit around the moon. And just about 110 hours from launch until they stepped foot on the moon.
I feel like that's not that much. But that's 5 days. That's really not. But then again, if you think about it, so you're flying through space for you're just going for 3 of those days. Somebody has to be on high alert piloting the whole time.
And there's only 2 people.
There's only 2 people. What do you do for that?
That's the ultimate road trip.
Where does your brain go for 3 days? Yeah, that's true.
What do you think it's more boring to fly through space or Kansas? Because it's not like you look to your left and you see mountains. It's like you look to your left and you see vast emptiness.
Yeah. In both situations.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. You look inside my heart.
But honestly, that is the perfect road trip situation. Get to know each other because we might not make it back. So we might as well just shoot the shit.
Do they have music? Do you think that they had Houston sound control just bring in live?
I feel like I saw facts about certain space missions where they brought music with them. Am I making that up? Or am I thinking of the one movie, the space movie where they played Staying Alive or disco music the whole time? What am I thinking of? The Martian. That's what I'm thinking of.
Oh.
Where they had 70s disco music.
I was going to say Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, well, that too. So I'm... Maybe we're not credible because I'm making movie references and saying they're facts.
Hey, we never said we're credible sources.
Well, we kind of did earlier, didn't we?
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, so what we decided to do is we're going to do a podium of what our top 3 things we would do if we were the first person to step foot on the moon. So
I want to revisit. It took them 8 hours. How long did it take them to get out of the...
So they landed. It took 6.5 hours before they left. They probably were like, yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of preparation.
Scary.
I mean, they're probably like, should we actually do this? This is terrifying.
Oh my God.
What if the spacesuit... They're probably sitting there like, well, do we do this? Let's hope our spacesuit is... If it's not completely airtight, like, we're going to suffocate to death.
Imagine, like, I could not imagine being in that situation. They're making survival plans. Like, they don't know what. They could open that hatch and just get eaten.
I'm just going to say, so any of you out there who at one point in your life said you wanted to be an astronaut, that's the last thing I would want to do on the planet. Couldn't. I'm glad that there are people who are courageous enough to do that. I personally am not. So
I can't
shout out Buzz and Neil for literally being the bravest human beings on the planet.
Retweet. All right, so let's get into the podium. I'll let you start because I've got 7 of them, but I don't know which one's going to be my bronze.
My first one, anyway, I said this one to Kevin yesterday, and I was like, I don't know if I should say it on the podcast, but I'm going to anyway because it's kind of funny. I would make sure that I have retrofitted my spacesuit accordingly, but I would take a photo of me mooning on the moon.
Yeah.
And have to. Yeah.
I would think about that. I was thinking about that. You could easily just make some kind of flap with like a...
Yeah, and then just make everything else like airtight somehow.
You would still be in your spacesuit, but you would have a cover flap that would like go down, and there would still be like
or maybe, the
spacesuit, but it's just see-through.
Yeah, exactly. Some sort of like plastic where I could properly moon. But that's my bronze. What's your bronze?
All right, so my bronze, shout out to anyone who picks this up, but I want to do a cartwheel, but real casual, like not make a big deal about it, but I know everybody saw it. Just one stunning, gorgeous cartwheel. That would be my bronze.
So I feel like you're quoting something and I'm not on the same page. What are you quoting? Are you quoting something?
Yeah, Creed Bratton from The Office.
Oh, does he say it?
It's his,
which episode?
It is the resolution, the New Year resolution one.
But the thing, we have to discuss that in all of these situations, there's always going to be another astronaut on board with us taking video because obviously iPhones work on the moon.
IG, yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, like the bigger part of my bronze would be just like gymnastics stuff. I would just like flip and jump, and I think honestly,
I heard even though there's the pull of gravity is less there, I heard it's like hard. You feel heavier.
Oh, that's not fair.
So it's not like being on a trampoline.
Oh.
That's what I thought at first. I was like, I'm going to do a triple backflip.
Well, no. I'm going to act like that's not true. Okay. Because I think like the first thing like in all human instinct that you would actually do is you would just like, you'd be so hyped, you'd just start jumping around and trying to hit flips and stuff. And yeah, so my silver is I would look for Albert Pujols' home run off of Brad Lidge in Game 5 of the 2005 NLCS against Houston. So that thing still hasn't landed, and I'm pretty sure it's up on the moon.
Oh my God. Clever.
What's your silver?
So I said that I would keep a beer inside of my spacesuit and then take a knee and chug it inside of my spacesuit.
First shotgun.
And then part 2, because obviously everyone lands.
Wait. How do you open the beer if it's inside your spacesuit?
I feel like you could like pull your
like
arm
shimmy
inside the sleeve, you know?
Okay.
And then so have them make it a little bit extra, a little extra room so I can make this happen.
You got a really modified spacesuit.
What beer would it be?
What's the most American beer?
I was going to say Boulevard Cosmic IPA because it's like punny.
Okay.
Or the most American beer. So like a Bud Heavy.
Yeah, I definitely have to do a Bud Heavy.
Part 2 would be because everyone lands clearly in the same area on the moon. So when the Russians show up next, I would have hidden a Smirnoff Ice behind a rock.
The first ice in history, a moon ice.
The first ice in history.
That'd be incredible.
Yeah. Anyway, so
you should know. I think for Russians, you would just hide a bottle of Smirnoff vodka. And like that's their version of getting ice.
And they're like, thank God we ran out on the way up here and we need more. Thanks for restocking us.
All right, be careful. Hopefully there are no Russian listeners out there. Speaking of Russia, you know the Face app?
Yeah, they're stealing all of our data.
Sucks.
I haven't done it. I'm safe.
I'm safe.
We're high-fiving. I don't know if you guys could hear that, but we high-fived.
Yeah, I called it. I knew it. Not really. I was just too lazy to download another app. All right. So was that your
silver?
Silver?
Yeah.
Okay. So 2-part. Then what's your gold?
My gold is leaving a sign that says, if you're not first, you're last.
Okay. All right. So no flag. I guess, would you do that instead of the flag?
The American flag?
Yeah, are we assuming the American flag is posted in this situation?
I didn't really think about that, I guess. I could do both. American flag and just next to it a sign that says, if you're not first, you're last.
Yeah. So I think I messed up, and my last one should have been my gold because the next couple options I have aren't good. So I said weigh myself and then create a crash dieting book on how I lost hundreds in just a few hours. My next one is I would plant food with my poop. I would take a box of crackers and see if the moon was made of cheese. You
wouldn't just take a bite
I would
first.
see if there were any cows jumping over the moon. And if there were, I would catch them and make a hamburger.
Okay, those are all great. I don't know what you're talking about. That was great. That was great. So yeah, shout out. Happy 50th birthday, Apollo moon landing.
Yeah,
we love you. Had to give you a shout out.
All right. The next big thing happening in the recent news is the Elon Musk announcement of his company Neuralink, and they had a presentation where they kind of released the first product. Everybody knows that Elon, I think we described it 20 episodes ago, let's say. Elon got pretty involved with artificial intelligence. If you've seen his Joe Rogan interview, he mentioned something that I thought was pretty weird, and the tone of his voice, I interpreted it one way, but in general he said, this will give us the option of merging with AI, and Elon's thoughts are that eventually we're going to have to come to a point where either AI will take us over or we become part of AI. And he thinks that like the human species will merge with AI and have the option to, I thought was weird phrasing, as if there was ever a choice. Like if it's either like we have the option or we'll be taken over. And he's saying he's trying to give us the option to merge with AI because I don't know.
So with that preface, we should talk a little bit about the technology that he presented, and then it'll make a lot of sense about why he said these things. But I remember getting to work on, what day, like Tuesday or Wednesday last week, and I pulled up an article and it was talking about Neuralink, and I read into it. So essentially, it's a technology where they embed threads into your brain, and it gives you the opportunity to control computers with your brain without any actual physical movement required.
Yeah.
So just think, I want to, literally me thinking in my brain, I want to click on that, and then it can do it like without moving a mouse or anything. It's crazy.
I think honestly everybody should view this video of the presentation. It's incredibly informative and mind-blowing. We'll share it on our Twitter page, Close the Business Podcast, @COB Podcast. But they kind of describe how the human brain works and how you have these synapses that just fire electrical dust at each other, essentially. Mm-hmm. And there's a spike in voltage when this electrical signal is sent across synapses in your neurons in the brain. And that is how we think. That is how we move. That's how we live, essentially. And these hairs that Becca mentioned, they're like 1/10 the size of a human hair, and they can be
it's like 4 to 6 micrometers or something.
Microns,
which is nuts.
And that they can strategically, using this robot that they built, they can strategically place these. They call them not hairs, but electrodes or whatever, like these little thin hair wires, strategically so that they can capture the voltage spike when these synapses fire. And they said that there would be 10,000 of these hairs in your brain capturing voltage spikes from 10,000 synapses, and then they would use algorithm. So it'd just be a waveform, a sinusoidal, cosine, waveform, whatever. And that there'd be a spike in voltage, and they could translate these spikes in voltages to thoughts, to like, so if I'm thinking about moving, then it will translate that electrical signal, and then I think when it comes to like paraplegic, the issue is they can think about moving, but they don't have the other response of actually physically moving.
Yeah.
So then they can stimulate an electrical signal to physically move your muscles. So that way you're controlling the AI. Mm-hmm. Your thought is what's being translated. So it's data being sent back to a sensor through that thread. and then sent via Bluetooth through a processor, which would lay behind your ear.
Yeah, it looks like a hearing aid type thing on the back of your ear.
And then it would be sent back, and then you would move. It would control. I guess the idea is you would control and be able to move your body. And that's kind of mind-blowing because, I never thought about like the distinction of your thoughts controlling it versus like somebody taking a controller, like just an input of electrodes to make you move, but you wouldn't be able to initiate that moving.
I think the thing that's so insane in general is think about how little we know at this point about the human brain. We know so little about it. We have all of these unsolved psychological disorders that we can't figure out, but they've created a technology that they can implant into your brain that can help you control computers and movements and robots and stuff with your thoughts. That's the thing that blows my mind the most. It's like we're slowly debunking the brain.
And right now, like this is just to like help with disorders, right?
Yeah.
And to trigger memories or to help with like motor functions. But and Elon mentioned that this is 1,000 times the magnitude or better than what's FDA approved. And that's a huge order of magnitude for when you're talking a scientific leap, 1,000 times. Like that's incredible.
So I think that this is a technology that's actually been in development and they've been doing research on for several years. I think there are other companies that are actually involved with creating this technology. But once again, Elon Musk sees an awesome idea, swoops in, and he's like, I'm going to do it literally 100 times better than you. And he's able to bring in the right people, the right team, do the research, get his manufacturing together and like bring these crazy ideas or bring things that other people haven't been able to achieve to life, which is insane. I know that he said in that speech, which I think that his team wasn't expecting him to tell the public about this, but I think they've already tested it on monkeys and monkeys are using it just fine. Like it operates on monkeys' brains.
Yeah. So time frame, they want to have this in humans before the end of 2020.
Yeah.
So we've got a year and a half before we have literally walking cyborgs. And at first I was not a fan of this.
That's terrifying.
Right. Because I mean, we're talking about they're recording your thoughts in order to process it and turn that into a motor function. Where is this data going? We already, with everything going on today, big data, you can't really trust them. We don't know if we should trust them. So like, are they going to own your intellectual property?
I feel like there's going to have to be regulations that come out of this. You know what I mean? I'm sure that there's going to be an uproar from the public once they get a true understanding of like all of the information that they have access to. Is it going to be something where I don't know. I think about it from like a crime standpoint because like what does that mean that they can listen to people who are going to thinking about committing crimes?
You remember the Minority Report? Like how it was pre-crime, how like they could arrest people who hadn't yet committed crime.
Oh, I didn't realize that was a thing.
Yeah, it's a great movie. I played the video game when I was a kid, but the whole basis of the movie is they had these people who could predict murders, and they could know the time, the place, and the person guilty, and you would get arrested before you had even committed the murder. And there was this whole like, is this moral? Yeah, ethical. Yeah. Like this earpiece that the microchips are Bluetooth to is controlled by an app. And you can your phone has a direct link to your brain and to your actions. So if someone stole your phone or hacked your phone,
oh my God,
could they control you? And you don't have to, like with the 5G network, like...
No, it's cool. We got Face ID. It's fine.
Right, but you don't have to physically hack into someone's phone. You could hack into their phone, not be there, and
remote.
Yeah. So like, what if we're at a voting booth, and your muscles are kind of controlled by this cyborg thing in your brain?
Oh my God!
And you're voting, and like, oh, I'm gonna. I don't know. Just made me think a little bit there.
Oh my God, that is a freaking mind bomb.
So I wrote a paragraph while I was reading this while I was watching this video because I was so hyped on something called the neural code. And guys, you need to watch this video. It's incredible. But trying to capture the neural code of our thoughts and transmit the output. The neural code is nothing short of the matrix, and we have algorithms that can... Yeah, so the neural code is like, it literally like picture the matrix screen of all the numbers. That is essentially the neural code that they can like translate, like they like flip it and then it becomes like some kind of a solid structure that you can see like a pattern, and then they can translate that pattern by like running it through algorithms. And it's incredible. And it made me think about this whole artificial intelligence. Like, what if our only purpose on Earth is to create artificial intelligence?
It's like the sequence of evolution.
Yeah, like I'm assuming it was monkeys to humans, and then humans to cyborgs, and then eventually we're just like
What's after
flesh
cyborgs?
And blood is gone.
Yeah.
Cyborgs might be the owners of the universe. Wow. Who knows?
Oh, man.
So yeah, I got into my head. Oh, and I got a new tattoo idea. You can translate your thoughts into neural code, and it looks really cool. You could do like, I don't know, like your favorite movement or like a meaningful thought to you.
That's so cool.
You should get a tattoo of it in neural code.
That would be so dope.
Yeah.
Then like when the cyborgs come.
They know.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, I'm peace. You would think of.
Yeah. You put you put peace on your arm, and then you're safe.
Yeah.
The cyborgs won't attack you.
It's like a barcode. Like, hey, this dude's chill. Yeah. So I was in my thoughts last night watching this video, and I was getting geeked up. I cannot wait till we finally do our artificial intelligence episode.
I agree. I'm hyped up. This is the stuff we live for. We live to talk about. So more developments on this story. We will keep you guys
posted.
Up to date.
This technology is only going to be further aided by the use of 5G networks. And
speaking of
5G networks, we have an incredible interview.
Yeah, so this episode is kind of the first of what we think is going to be many episodes, many interviews regarding 5G, because it's an insane, pertinent technology.
5G and the implications of 5G.
Yeah, exactly. So we learned a ton during this interview, and we hope that you guys are going to learn a ton too. This kind of like set the foundation.
This is top 5 interview.
Set the foundation for our understanding of the technology. And like, first off, how do cell phones and data work?
Yeah.
So stick with us. We're really excited about this interview. Hopefully you guys enjoy it and learn as much from it as we did.
Good afternoon, closers. Here we got another episode for you today. Here with us for this recording is Dave Hallowell. He's the Senior Vice President of Public Networks for Black & Veatch's Telecom Group. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Welcome.
So we brought Dave on because kind of what we teed up in this episode, we kind of want to keep it 5G. What is 5G technology-wise? What's the current state of it, and kind of what's the future state of 5G? So kind of before we get started, us three right now, we don't work in telecom, so we do not have any knowledge of 5G.
This is one of our first episodes outside the realm of power.
Right.
So
yeah, we're hoping to get educated on this. We're fresh minds for you to help mold.
Wonderful.
So
I guess, could you explain, as if you're in the room with a bunch of 5-year-olds and you were trying to
or your son and your daughter is asking what do you do, or what is 5G?
What is a cell phone network, I guess?
Okay, so technology-wise, a wireless network or a cellular network, cellular mainly, is a cell site, a mobile device, which typically is a phone, a smartphone, and then there's backhaul and a switch. And so in your phone, there's an antenna, low-power antenna. At the cell site, there's a high-power antenna. And through radio frequency, those two communicate. And at the cell site, it's connected via backhaul, which is typically fiber these days. It used to be various copper, whether it's microwave, copper, could have been anything in that realm. But today, typically, it's fiber back to a switch, and then that connects to, I'll call it the internet, but it connects to the global network, so you're tied in at that point.
So was it dumb of me to think that satellites were involved in some way?
Yes.
There are mobile satellite phones, just not very prevalent.
That's what they call a sat phone.
Yeah, sat phone. And so they're used for remote communications. Wouldn't be, there's speed issues or latency issues with them, as well as bandwidth issues with a satellite phone. But the distance the signal has to travel to the satellite and then back to Earth causes a latency problem. Before you don't. For
the listeners out there that have never heard the word latency or know what it is, can you explain that
basically
for us?
So it's responsiveness of your phone. So you would hear a delay in voice. Potentially data would take forever for it to transmit back and forth. I say forever compared to communicating with our wireless network that's hooked to a cell site through fiber.
Yeah.
So I'm making a phone call with you across the city. I talk into my cell phone. The cell phone converts that to a wave frequency. It sends it to the cell tower. Does it go to the backhaul and then go back to a wave signal so that you hear, and then it converts again so that you hear it. Correct. And it's kind of that constant communication.
So it goes, yeah, you're exactly right. It's radio frequency to the tower through backhaul to the switch. The switch then would route it to potentially either somebody sitting at their desk or another phone, or out to another cell site, and then wirelessly connect to somebody else that's on a mobile device.
So for a phone call, like, what's the typical latency?
I just realized, like, I'm calling someone across the nation. There's like 0 seconds delay.
Right. Like, what's that?
How does
like,
it find them that
latency?
quick?
Between, obviously there's latency between a live action sporting event, something you see on your TV. Like, I've experienced that, but like on a phone call, what's
milliseconds.
the delay? Milliseconds?
Yes.
Short enough that like a human being can't actually process it for the most part. Oh, that's crazy.
So a phone call is kind of like data in terms of routing the information or the signal, connects that cell tower, goes through fiber to the network, and then it's somehow if you're calling another cell phone in Alaska, it finds them.
Your phone is your phone is sending out a ping signal all the time, so it knows what tower you've pinged with your cell phone. So it kind of follows you around. Right? So,
and your cell phone is tied to your IP address too. So every I
don't know about IP. Well, yeah, it's tied to there's a.
You have like an ID number or something?
Serial number on your phone, let's say.
Okay.
For layman's terms.
So when I'm calling someone, I'm calling essentially their ID number.
Well, is that what their phone number is?
It's their phone number, correct.
Okay. Oh, well, very technological of me to say.
I wonder if we're ever going to run out of phone numbers, now that I'm thinking about it.
We start going 10-digit phone
numbers.
We are,
yeah.
Can we do the math and figure out how many different combinations of phone numbers there could be?
Well, they already said, so my research, they said they already bumped up the IP addresses. Like it used to have technological boom, they had a certain number, but now they bumped it up to more digits.
Oh.
So it may happen.
Infinitely growing. All right, so that's good. I've always wondered, like, okay, how the heck does this thing work? Like, we grew up with cell phones essentially and just kind of took them for granted.
Some of us did.
That being said, you're talking about like you're always pinging a tower, and I guess it's 2019. Why do we still have bad service? If there's we're building towers, we've had time to build the infrastructure. Why is it that we still can't access?
So there are a lot of areas, like a white space, which is in rural America, that just doesn't economical. It's expensive to build a cell site, and so economically it doesn't make sense. Not enough users there to support that infrastructure.
Okay.
You have challenges in metropolitan areas because of other infrastructure. So the signal's not perfect, doesn't penetrate everything. You have
building walls might be an issue based on the bandwidth of that particular signal, right?
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
What's bandwidth mean, Becca?
I just read it on the internet earlier this week. That's the only reason I know why.
The frequency at which the cell phone, the carrier transmits at, there are various frequencies for that. And so some frequencies have better penetrating characteristics than others. So typically the higher you get in frequency, the worse penetrating.
Like 5G.
Like 5G. Well, yes. There's low band 5G and high band 5G. Okay. So we can talk about that.
We'll get into it.
So what's like a typical radius of a cell tower? How often do you need to construct these throughout a city or whatever?
Well, that answer is very difficult. Well, it varies because of the way it's structured today. So capacity drives location. So the number of connected devices will create you to have more cell sites in a certain geographic area. But signal itself, like, rural America, they're on the highway every 14, 15 miles, something like that. In town here, they're every 1 to 2 miles.
Oh, okay.
And that's based on, density of population, density of use, and those types of things. So that's how they've been cited, so to speak. And the need for it has, driven the capacity add, where you'd have to add additional cell sites within a certain geographic area.
Do all of these towers look the same?
There are various types of structures that support cell sites. So you commonly think of the tower. When we talk towers, that's what we typically say, but it's really cell sites. So telecommunication infrastructure or equipment can be placed on various structure types. So a lot of in urban areas, they're placed on rooftops. They're placed on water towers, smokestacks, light poles. All different types of structures or infrastructure support anything that you can basically put an antenna on and have a radio at the base of it. Would support telecommunications.
Okay. That's smart, utilizing pre-existing infrastructure to build rather than creating a brand new
So
structure.
Is the new, or the cell towers, or the cell packs, I guess, are those kind of like almost really large white-looking Tupperware almost type of things. They're like little massive pillows, white pillows. That
so you have antennas, and typically those antennas are what radiate and what transmit RF and receive RF from your phone, and those you'll see those. That's the visible part. You typically don't see the radio or the base station. That's somewhere behind a wall or on the ground that you wouldn't see that. But the antennas are the crucial part. Well, the radio is crucial as well, but the antenna is the part that's visible to the general public, I'll say.
Gotcha.
So let's say I'm a cell phone service provider. Do I pay you, a building owner, to put my antenna up there? And two-part question. Part B, if I'm a cell phone service provider, Becca's a different cell phone service provider, and Ryan's a third. Do we all have our own on top of these buildings, or can we share?
Yeah, who gets dibs?
You all have your own. So each carrier has their own. When we mentioned towers before, not rooftops necessarily. Some rooftops are managed by companies that are in the vertical real estate business, but there are big tower companies that allow multiple carriers on each tower. So carriers, when I'm talking carriers, I'm talking about public carriers: AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile.
Yeah.
They locate on a common tower owned by a vertical real estate company, basically. But the equipment is always their own. It's not shared equipment. I say always.
So on any particular site, there could be 3 or 4 different antenna for each carrier.
Are there companies that will build a tower and essentially you're selling like a plot of land, but it's a plot on that tower for a carrier?
Correct.
To
That's their business. So they build a tower that'll say is a 4-carrier tower, meaning you can put 4 different carriers on that tower, and then so hopefully you'll get all 4, or you'll get Sprint.
Is vertical real estate a lucrative business? Should I go into it and start buying plots of land that
it has been a very lucrative business in the fact that it's a piece of steel, so there's not a lot of upkeep, and it's kind of the old saying, location, location, location. So if you get a tower in a good location, if the tower company finds a plot of land in, let's say, the middle of Leawood, where it's hard to zone and permit, then everybody will come. So
I feel a new business plan coming on. I'm going to create an algorithm based on development in a particular area. I'm going to preemptively choose a spot based on that algorithm, and I'm going to buy it, and then Sprint's going to go.
Cut that from the interview. We don't want to put that out in the public.
We're going to save that for our own business use.
So I guess, do companies exclusively build their own towers?
They did, and I'll say maybe. Historically now, that one time they did. So all the carriers own towers. Now they've sold those off. I mentioned that there are big tower companies that call the big 3. Basically, all those towers have been sold off to the big 3, and it's really about CapEx versus OpEx. So they sold off the towers.
What's CapEx and OpEx?
Capital expenditure. So to build a tower is very expensive. To co-locate on a tower is a lot less expensive.
Got it.
And so that they would take that and say, okay, well, go to a build-to-suit company, which are these tower companies, and they would go build a tower for them and then lease space, which should be a OpEx play instead of a CapEx play. So operating expense versus capital expenditure.
Gotcha.
Okay, and then, that led to another question. Then what is this race? Because the entire reason, at least in the history of me seeing these commercials, it's like switch to Sprint, switch to AT&T, switch to Verizon, T-Mobile, because our service is better. But it sounds like they're pretty much going to be located at the same location. So how does service differ between carrier?
Well, I mean, it does vary because, some carriers don't have as many cell sites as others or don't have the same location. So you do get variation in coverage from carriers or service from carriers based on their current network. And so just because one carrier is there, the other one doesn't go there. It all depends on how much money they have to spend and what their demographics, or what it looks like for them,
where they have
investment.
Where they have more customers, they're going to make sure their service is better, versus if they see that they don't have a lot of customers in a specific area, they're going to maybe not invest heavily. And I've got one last question.
Unless they see it as an opportunity to make money.
Mine kind of ties into this.
Okay, go ahead.
So if I have Sprint, let's say, and Kevin has AT&T, if I'm communicating with Kevin, does it go through my, my signal goes to did I say a Sprint?
Yeah.
Okay. It goes to a Sprint cell tower, and then when it gets distributed, does it go to through AT&T? how did that? Can you answer that question?
Do they play nicely together?
So you would talk you'd be wireless on the AT&T network to the mobile switch. You're Sprint to the switch, and then it ties together at the network.
So there is like some point of crossover though between both AT&T and Sprint or whoever carrier we're talking about.
Right. Once it gets back to, I'll call it the internet. Once you get back to the network in general, then mobile switch is transferred over to the other carrier.
Interesting.
Okay. So what if I'm like this new company and I think these exist, because I think this is like what Cricket and Boost Mobile do, but I'm not sure. I don't own my own switch, but can I pay other companies to piggyback off of their network?
So you're talking about an MVNO model, which is basically they ride on somebody else's network and they're just selling service. So they went and bought service from AT&T or Sprint wholesale. And in the example, Cricket actually built a network, but now they ride on AT&T's network. But Boost is Sprint's prepaid service, but that's just riding on Sprint's network. So kind of an MVNO model. Yeah, so if Walmart wanted to create their own service, they would probably partner with a big carrier and then brand it as theirs, but they'd be riding on somebody else's network, whether it's one of the carriers.
What does that pay structure? This is probably like way too deep, but what does that pay structure look like? If I'm looking to, do I just like, hey, I'll give you $100,000 to use your network, or is it per customer I get? I'm paying you and I get a little bit of margin? That's too much.
Good question. I don't know how those deals are structured, but I mean, it'd be a wholesale rate. They'd be buying data or service bandwidth by wholesale rate. And so that'd be the idea that they could, potentially somebody could pick up a big chunk of business. It'd be at a lower rate than what the general consumer buys at.
Got it.
But the carriers might see that attractive in that they believe they could sell a large chunk. To some potential business.
Yeah. Could we explain bandwidth real quick?
Bandwidth. So bandwidth is really frequency band. When I mentioned radio frequency, so there's spectrum blocks that the FCC allocates, or people actually go and they auction them off. Carriers buy those, and that's where they're allowed to transmit and receive signal. So that's really kind of the limiting factor. If a lot of reading goes on about we're going to run out of frequency, but technology has advanced quick enough that we haven't run out. And now the FCC is opening up more and more frequency blocks as well to alleviate some of that stress. But really that is the limiting factor. And so if you look at, 30 megahertz is a frequency band. There's a band at 1800, let's call it, it's 30 megahertz wide. And that's where some carrier plays in that space. So they're within that 30 megahertz of frequency band.
So if you had a bunch of devices all in kind of one frequency bandwidth, what will that cause latency, or what does that kind of cause?
Causes drop calls and missed calls. So it's a fixed amount of spectrum you have, and so that's why you see densification of cell sites, so they can reuse frequency. So then your cell is smaller, so there's less users within that cell, and then you move over one cell and it's a different set of frequencies, and move over another cell and it's different set of frequencies.
So latency is caused by
lack of bandwidth?
Lower frequency bandwidth?
Latency is caused by capacity or constraints. So yes.
Okay.
So in 5G, what they're going to do to improve latency is edge computing, fiber connection closer to the end user.
Okay.
As well as larger blocks of frequency. So that's what we kind of touched on, millimeter wave spectrum or high spectrum. And so that's where 5G really hits its stride, because you can look at 100 megahertz blocks of spectrum instead of 30. And these are all general terms, but it increases your spectrum, your frequency band from 30 to 100 megahertz. And so you have a lot more area to play, a lot more frequency space to carry traffic.
And I mean, from a mathematical standpoint, 30 to 100, you could break that number down infinitesimally. Like, I said that word right. That was infinitesimally. I said it right. Okay. I'm smarter than you.
I might fight you. But I think it's wrong.
You could just keep going like 0.01, 0.001, 0.0 like.
Yeah, there are certain a channel has a band, right? So a channel within a frequency band. So that's another block within a band, and that channel is defined.
Okay.
So then you run into, you don't have enough channels within the band, and that's why you got to go to 100 megahertz swath instead of 30 megahertz.
Okay, so we were talking about frequencies, and you started touching a little bit on 5G specifically. So the main topic of this interview, obviously, is, what is 5G and how is it going to affect us and how does it work? So can you give us like a really low-level description of what 5G is?
You want to go back to 1G, 2G, 3G,
Yes, please.
4G?
Yeah.
So we take it back. It really starts out at 1G.
And could you quickly explain what G
means? That's just first generation cellular network.
Okay.
Very complex.
Yeah.
But the first generation cellular network, early 80s, 82, I think, sometime around there, was really just analog communication. So we talked about cell towers. That transmission from your cell phone to the tower at that time, or the cell site, was really, and in layman's terms again, it was like talking on a walkie-talkie back to the tower. The beauty of it was it tied into the network, which allowed you to call other people's mobile phones or landlines, or mostly landlines at that time. And it was just analog voice. So there was no additional services other than voice.
Yeah.
So then 2G was really just digital. So that was the second generation, turned that analog communication into digital communication. It allowed text messaging and some picture capabilities. That happened in the early 90s. In early 2000s, 3G came along, and that was just really improved speed. It was still digital, improved speed over 2G, and it allowed video. It allowed data, mainly data.
So like internet connectivity.
Essentially. And then 4G happened roughly 2010, 2011. So those Gs have been about 10 years apart. If you said it's a decade to get to a G. So 5G will be, if you do the math, that's 2020, which we're quickly approaching.
Slowly, Quick question. What allowed from it being called, like, I had to pay for text messages and photos to now I just pay for general data? Was that just like a business thing, or was that a technology thing?
That's a business thing.
Oh,
really.
okay.
So that just, competition drives it. It's like unlimited plans versus not unlimited plans. And so all of a sudden, hey, kind of mention about coverage and why somebody's better than somebody else. And so there's also a marketing ploy to say, hey, we'll throw all this in for one low price.
Okay. And then 4G was the LTE. They're not different?
Well, they are, but it's really long-term evolution is what LTE stands for. And 4G is the standards that LTE runs on, so to speak.
Oh, okay.
So 4G really was, that came around about the same time as the iPhone. So it drove a lot of the smartphone applications and those types of things. So 4G improved latency through a number of different things, but really, at that point, we brought high-speed backhaul, which was fiber or Ethernet to the cell, and then they also placed radios behind the antennas and took fiber up the tower to basically cut down on latency or responsiveness of the network, or improve responsiveness of the network, and allow those things to happen with your iPhone or Android device. 5G, which is being deployed somewhat today in a fixed fashion, it'll improve that. It'll be a lower latency network. It'll be lower latency, higher speed, and it'll allow for a lot more connected devices. And so that's really the advantage of it. And what'll happen with a network is you'll have to densify the network. In other words, I mentioned that before a little bit, but you're talking about, we asked the question earlier about how far apart is a cell site. When you get to 5G nodes, you could be as close as every 600 to 1,200 feet.
So for a higher bandwidth, and that's more so what 5G is going to be operating on, correct? A higher bandwidth. That means you need more frequent cell sites because it's a smaller radius of connectivity, essentially.
Like
if that
the
makes
wavelength
sense.
doesn't go as far?
No. Part of it is really about, so it's a flattening out of the network. And what happens is if you put a node every 1,200 feet, within every 1,200 feet, you're going to be riding on light instead of radio waves. So your transmission from your phone to a cell tower that's a mile away, that's over radio frequency. Okay. If I could do that over light, it would be much quicker.
What do you mean over light?
So fiber optic cable. So each of these 5G nodes will have fiber optic cable to them, or very within close proximity to them. And therefore, once you get to light, you're traveling at the speed of light at that time. So now your data and everything else that comes out of your phone will be traveling at the speed of light at a much quicker time. So the distance will have an impact on that. So the distance from your phone to the node, and then once it hits the node, it'll be basically at a fiber connection at that point.
So are all of these, you're talking about densification, now that we're having more and more connection whether through all these electronic devices, is it going to just keep on getting denser and denser as far as how many 5G nodes they need to deploy?
There's an optimal amount of nodes. At some point, it's covered. So that's the part of the densification as well. So 5G really will enable the Internet of Things. So you think about sensors and those types of things. It allows for a ton of connected devices and low power devices. Again, that's part of the proximity to the densification. The proximity to the device will allow for a much lower power device.
And lower powered, for those who may not know, and I may be completely wrong, but the way these signals are transmitted is through a power signal. So like lower powered, you don't have to send that signal as far, right?
Right, correct. So it'll be much closer to the node itself.
Yeah.
Low band and high band 5G. So high band will be in urban dense areas. So they're going to utilize millimeter wave technology in the urban core. Low band will remain probably in suburban/rural areas. Okay. It'll still be 5G technology, but just like with your 4G device, they'll be really, really blazing fast 5G, and then there'll be slow and clunky 5G.
Yeah.
And I say slow and clunky, it'll still be better than the 4G network you have today, but it won't be like what you get when you're in the urban core potentially riding on millimeter wave spectrum.
So it sounds like a lot of the technology, and I know we use the term technology broadly, but when I say technology, the fiber is going to be the same as what we have with the 4G. It's just we're going to have more of it. The antennas probably a little bit better, but there's no new groundbreaking technology with the antennas. The entire basis of 5G is just kind of like what we're doing with microgrids, is we're making everything smaller and more distributed versus one centralized location for all of the connected devices.
Right. So lower band frequencies have their wavelength is much bigger. And so we talked about antennas a little bit, but in a 600 megahertz network, 800 megahertz network, you may need a 6-foot tall antenna because that is close to the.
I know that equation.
Oh, wow. I don't. But it's close to that frequency bandwidth. When you get to millimeter technology, you're getting up in the 28 gigahertz frequencies. That wavelength is much shorter. Therefore, you can have a much shorter antenna. So everything gets smaller.
So more like discrete.
So that'll when you talk about buildings, that's another thing. So how does 5G penetrate into buildings? So a lot of people originate calls or originate data from their desk or from inside a building. So that's some of the challenges the carriers have, is how they're going to handle, they'll be able to cover it on the street, but how do you get inside the building? So those are challenges yet to be determined, but that's something that they've overcome in the past.
So the big technological jump is really going up into the higher bandwidth, which kind of opens up lanes of unused frequency, right?
Well, unused is probably a loose term because the FCC will have to clear some of those bands from existing
military.
Yeah. Somebody somewhere is using it now.
Using them. So,
opening it up to the public.
Some of them are cleared, but some of them they will need to clear yet.
They're probably bumping up to even higher or something.
Yeah, to use to utilize that frequency.
Okay. So I have a carrier that says I have 5GE. Do I have 5G right now, or is it being implemented yet?
You have 5G potentially, but it has been deployed in some markets, but it's very limited. So, we talk about 2020. I've seen plans that say ubiquitous 5G coverage by 2025. So it'll be the start of it. So we're on the cutting edge of it today. But a lot has to happen, and that's where kind of we come in, Black and Veatch, where this whole densification of the network, for 5G to truly work, as I mentioned, you have to have a node every 1,200 feet. Well, they're not there today. So there's a lot of infrastructure needs to be added. A lot of fiber needs to be put in the ground or hung on poles. So those things are really good for us, but that's really what has to happen for it to work. So you may see 5G come up on your phone, and you may be in an area. I know there was a 6-city block area up in Minnesota that was covered by 5G, but it's 6 city blocks or something. So
Lucky.
It's very remote today, or not. It's not ubiquitous by any stretch of the imagination. But for a long time, you're going to ride 5G and go off to 4G. So it'll hand off back to 4G. So you'll see some differences, but generally you wouldn't. Unless you're running a 5G application.
So right now it's based on location. If I'm in an area that has an existing 5G infrastructure, like in that 6-block area in Minnesota, my phone has the capabilities to utilize it. But if I come back to Kansas City and we're peasants and we only have 4G right now, then it would just use 4G capabilities. Correct. Essentially. Okay, gotcha.
Is there any noticeable effect for 5G right now? You kind of mentioned earlier that this creates room for applications, like intense applications. And you mentioned briefly autonomous vehicles, which I loved. I don't is it we're going to notice it right now, or this is going to open the door for the Internet of Things to appear for heavier applications on our phone and processing on our phone and autonomous vehicles, those sorts of applications.
Correct. I mean, I think you will see some improvement in speed and latency on your phone. So responsiveness, you go to a website and it's going to pop up real quick.
Okay.
So you'll see that. But really what it enables is much more than that. And, you talked about autonomous vehicles. So you're talking down in the 4 millisecond, 1 millisecond responsive range of a 5G network. That is what's going to be required if you had a bunch of autonomous vehicles. And so
that's how they're going to communicate.
That's how they communicate. And so they'll be peer to peer, which is vehicle to vehicle, and then peer to network. So vehicle to network communications all taking place.
How come 5G enables these heavier networks than 4G?
Well, it's what he just explained.
Yeah, it's really
denser connection.
So it's just density.
There's numbers out there that an autonomous vehicle will throw off 2 terabits a day or 16 terabits a day of data. Well, that data's got to go somewhere. Some of it's got to be stored. Some of it doesn't have to be stored. But think about how many cars on the road.
Yeah,
I was just in LA. It's like every one of these things.
So speaking to that point, do they design 5G network with the max load in mind? We're thinking of the future. We're thinking of autonomous vehicles. We're thinking of the Internet of Things. Smart cities. Realistically, everything's going to be needing a connection. Is 5G the solution, or is it a stepping stone to the final solution?
Well, they'll design 5G for the spectrum, right? So that'll be the limiting factor in the capabilities. And then, I don't know if I mentioned, but I went to a trade show, going to run out of spectrum, and we didn't because of technology advances. And so you get 5G, there'll be a 6G, that could potentially be a 7G, whatever. It'll keep.
We're opening the doors for additional technological advances. And once we hit that limit based on what the 5G capabilities are, it's like, okay, we're going to start looking at 6G because we need more infrastructure to support the technologies that we have now. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I didn't grow up on wireless communications, like I said earlier, so it's hard for me to fathom what you need that fast of a network for, but I get it. I mean, there's, like I said, autonomous vehicles is one thing. They're talking about robotic surgery, virtual reality, augmented reality. All those things will become more prevalent with a 5G network.
It's interesting to think about because I find the idea of autonomous vehicles being like a major component in everyday society and, operating infrastructure. And I'm kind of thinking about now, I've literally seen autonomous vehicles on the road. We see that technology is there. And part of me is kind of thinking, before this, I was thinking, okay, what's holding us back? I understand there's a lot of social, changes that need to happen. But in reality, we don't have, because they require low latency from a safety standpoint, then also they require such a large portion of a particular bandwidth. They're almost overloading our current capacity. That's why we haven't started integrating them yet. So once 5G is here, I'm going to see a lot more cars on the road without people driving them.
That's another question too, is 5G, or we're talking 5G, that's not just solely kind of given to carriers, right? Let's say a power plant or a car, Tesla, they're working on a certain bandwidth. They're not having to go through AT&T's bandwidth. They can kind of purchase their own bandwidth because, does that make sense? Because they're still transferring data. It's just not going through a carrier,
cell phone,
mobile device.
Yeah. That there's not frequency blocks available. So in Europe, there are frequency blocks available, and I know that auto manufacturers in Europe, Audi, they have developed, or they're in the process of putting 5G in some of their manufacturing facilities, and it's all for preparation or enabling robotics and those types of things in the manufacturing facility.
So this kind of brings up a good point. I know through our research, one of the first industries to be affected through 5G would be the industrial type industry. And that kind of confused me because we use Wi-Fi. Usually power plants use their own Wi-Fi, their own network. They're not connected to 5G. What's the distinction between the Wi-Fi and the network 5G, and how do we see those integrating?
Well, and 5G is just a technology. So just like Wi-Fi is a technology, 5G is a wireless technology that allows, we talked about low latency, high speed communication or data transmission. And so that is crucial when you're talking about robotics inside a facility. So you could have a 5G network, potentially a private 5G network. The challenge will be what frequency do you have to transmit and receive. Even though you're inside a building, you still have to have a license for that frequency band. So you can't, even though you're not tied to anybody else, you would interfere. So those frequency blocks that carriers buy over the auction are for their sole use, so you could not interfere with them. So that's some of the challenges. Like I mentioned, Europe set that aside. U.S. doesn't have that currently. But you're right. You could have a 5G network inside a facility today if you had frequency that you could transmit and receive over that would just be your private 5G network.
So I need to divorce 5G from AT&T, Sprint,
yes,
Verizon.
5G is just the technology standard.
Okay.
The carriers.
That was a huge confusion of mine. I just assumed it was purely mobile network.
Just for us, like on a daily, we interact when we hear 5G, it's all through cellular phones, but it's more the technology of communication.
Correct.
Jeez.
Wow.
Becca, add an explosion.
Add an explosion. I can do that.
So what are the markets that are kind of being adopting this 5G technology first? Is it more the industrial kind of use it on a small scale within their area, or is it more the carriers that are trying to implement it?
It's mainly the carriers. The carriers are going to implement it, and they're going to implement it in what we typically refer to as the NFL cities, so 32 cities, the largest metropolitan areas across the country, because that's where the population is.
Wait, so not St. Louis?
Yeah. Well, 33.
Well, okay. So we won the Stanley Cup, so we're a big deal.
Yeah. And so it's really around population centers, and that's where it'll be rolled out first, because that's where potentially the carriers would see return on investment.
So what I'm thinking right now is these cell phone carriers are the ones who own these frequencies that can operate in 5G. They've got a really almost a monopoly on the market for something that we're going to need almost everything to run off of here. So what's it going to take? I see that as being a huge hurdle for really being able to utilize this 5G technology is for companies who aren't mobile carriers, like, autonomous vehicles or just industrial power plants.
Or like you're a startup and you want to have a bandwidth and you need or whatever, you need to purchase some, but you may not. Are you going to have to go through AT&T and Verizon to buy that?
Or do we create more, or do we go to the FCC and we fight the power and we let them open up frequencies?
Well, that's a challenge because, as I mentioned, they're limited, and so they know their value. They're that frequency band is worth its weight in gold.
And this money goes to the government?
Goes to the government. And so I look at it as very similar to what, in this building we're sitting in today, we have a distributed antenna system that's through a carrier. So we don't have coverage inside this building today, but we have what I'll call a repeater for layman's terms, but a repeater in this building. And so similar to that, if somebody wants to get into manufacturing using robotics and a 5G network somehow in the industrial space, then potentially they could go to the carriers. There's 4 carriers that they go to and say, hey, I want a 5G network here, and they
I didn't think about that.
Come and bid it out maybe to 4 carriers and see who could deploy a 5G network.
So since they're kind of on the front end of this, they're going to have a big
they're going to make so much more money than just cell phones. Cell phones are probably like thing of the past. We're selling autonomous vehicle space.
So I'm gonna have a philosophy bomb here. Who's driving this market? Is it the carriers they're pushing for it because they see that there's a lot of monetary growth that they can get, or is this a technological thing that's making us develop this?
I look at
chicken before the egg.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of my opinion, but it's really 5G is an enabler, right? So it's going to allow somebody to create some new app or some robot or whatever, some sensor that's widely used. And so having it basically, there's this race to 5G. There was a race to every G almost from the carrier standpoint. And part of that's marketing. Part of that's, we have the largest 5G network. Well, who wouldn't want to be with that carrier that has the largest 5G network? So they would churn and jump off who they are and go to that carrier that has the largest 5G network. So it's really an enabler from that standpoint that, if they get the 5G network there and you do have autonomous vehicles and an autonomous vehicle maker, whose network are they going to ride on? Well, they're going to go ride on the best, right?
You can tell that they got this infrastructure set up.
Yeah.
The capitalist in me loves that companies own that, but a part of me is like, that kind of sucks that they have to go through a carrier. Why can't they buy their own? Why it's like a before I'm gonna go off on the deep end.
I think there was a president that said something about it.
Yeah, I'm just not gonna.
It's not really that if you think about it, it's not that different than the utility and electrical monopoly. It's probably highly regulated by the government.
Why are frequencies regulated by any entity? That's okay. Anyways,
that's a deep thought. That's a deep thought. Everyone marinate on that one.
How do people own a frequency? It's like, what?
How?
The ecosystem that supported the wireless carriers or the governmental agencies, there was a lot of pushback, not in my backyard, public hearings and those types of things. And then the FCC came up and Telecommunications Act, allowed for siting of cellular equipment, kind of paved the way. And so today, as we densify and we flatten the network out, now all of a sudden it's not a 150-foot tower that's over here in the back of a parking lot. It's a pole that's 30 foot tall on the side of the street. That's where the general public's walking, and there's every 1,200 feet there's one. And so the ecosystem that supports that or allows that to happen has not caught up. Just like, I was way back in my life, I was deploying cell sites. We go through moratoriums and you go through public hearings and it takes forever. Mm-hmm. That has kind of worked itself out over time, and there's a lot of rules and regulations, but if you follow them, you get through them. Right now, they're still kind of writing the regulations and writing the rules for how you deploy small cell nodes or 5G nodes in the right of way that's really close to, it's within the general public now. So you're talking about streetlights, lampposts.
So that business model that Becca said about purchasing land may be a little outdated because it's going to be...
But we could purchase the equipment. We could purchase the equipment.
Purchase the light pole. And then everyone has to pay me. Right. Yeah, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
Start putting random poles up everywhere.
Yeah. Do you want to use this for antenna? Pay me.
It's, people, I joke because there's 4G nodes that are put in town here on light poles, and if I drove down the street with my wife, she wouldn't see them. And I'm sure there's people that don't like the looks of them, but the general public, I don't know, maybe my wife's not the general public, but she wouldn't even know they were there unless I told her that they were there.
Yeah.
And so, it's not a 150-foot tower, but there is connection. You got to have fiber to it. You have to have power to it. And so those things cause some concern.
Good time to be in the fiber business.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, that's really what has to... I mean, it's really... A 5G network is really just a fiber network with antennas hanging off of it. So if you think about Christmas lights, every Christmas light on your Christmas tree is an antenna, and the fiber is the electrical cord that ties it together. And so that's really how you get to densification of a network.
So, in the past, everything you mentioned was ran through copper. Then we've got this introduction of fiber optic as a way for these signals to travel the speed of light. You can't get faster than the speed of light, but you still have the physical fiber itself. Do you see this being the last evolution, the most up to date, or are we looking past fiber?
I don't know if we're looking past fiber, but I think fiber is, to get fiber to these nodes, if you think about urban core and trying to tear up downtown Kansas City or hang fiber on poles down, it's very challenging. That becomes the long pole in the tent, in other words. So putting an antenna up there that's 6 inches tall or 12 inches tall, that could be easy. Getting fiber to it could be hard. And I think technology advances. There could be a potential somehow that there's a wireless backhaul or front haul, so that you emit the fiber from every node. Maybe the nodes communicate wirelessly to one another. Again, that's going to cause issues with latency potentially, but if they're close enough, maybe not, or maybe technology advances will improve. So that's kind of what I said. That our industry, technology advances decade over decade is proven, but even within that decade, there's been technology advances even further. So it is really a rapid evolving industry, and the technology keeps turning out new products that allow for faster communications.
So the fiber just allows essentially a conduit for light to travel without being interrupted, correct?
Correct.
There's no way to travel the speed of light without utilizing light, not necessarily visible light, and you can't do that wirelessly without the thought of interference.
Correct.
There's nothing that we can't send that won't be... There's no light that can't be interfered with? There's nothing above the visible spectrum that if I were to put my hand there, I would block it.
Interestingly enough, there was a company at one point that we worked for microwave backhaul, they did what they call it was laser backhaul. And so it was really lasers. We actually built a trial site here. So they laser, instead of using RF transmission, it was through light. I don't see them anymore, so I don't think that worked out. But again, who's to say what could be developed in the future?
But that's
the problem with light is line of sight, right? So you have to be able to see it. So you can't have a tree branch hanging in the way, or you get rainstorms, snowstorms, whatever you have could cause issues with that light if it's not in it.
Develop a new theory of physics that kind of works around this.
Well, I think that kind of wraps it up.
Part of the main reason we wanted to start this podcast in the first place is because we're a group of like young millennial engineers who are interested in these type of things. And believe it or not, a lot of times this is like what we sit and we talk about. Like I'll sit and I'll argue with my friends about these type of subjects at bars. So you're educating us that we can be smarter than our friends in school are friends when we're hanging out with them.
It's like a yelling match of people saying what they think they know.
Yeah, like when you try to say I didn't say infinite.
It's infinite.
Yeah.
This qualifies as barroom education. I get it. This isn't. Hopefully you weren't looking for classroom education. This might help you out in the bars, but it's not going to help you out.
No college credit. Yeah.
This was an awesome conversation.
And I think this fits in perfectly with like our next episode or one of our next episodes, smart cities, and kind of like getting into the Internet of Things. And this really tees it up well. Thank you for setting that.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for listening today, you guys. For more episodes, you can catch us on iTunes at Close of Business Podcast. Make sure to get on there and give us good reviews and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. And for your social media needs, you can hit us up on Instagram and on Twitter at COB Podcast. Be sure to follow us so you can get all of the alerts for our new episodes and check out what we're up to. If you want to shoot us an email with your questions or comments, you can do so at cobpodcast@gmail.com. See ya.